the miracles that Christ did, this is the only one that took place in stages. As you look at the miracles that Christ did, and as we continue to study the Gospel of John, and as we look at the signs that John uses to help us believe, John does not capture this. Matthew does not capture this. And Luke also does not capture this. It is the only miracle that has been done in stages. Why am I saying so? As you read the passage, you will notice that at some point Jesus takes a break and inquires of the man who is undergoing the healing process if it has indeed worked. As I read this passage, it appears to me that Christ is like some doctor who is testing some medication and trying to ask the patient, how did it go? What is the progress? Doctors would once in a while tell you, after 3 or 4 days, come back for checkup. We would want to know if you are progressing well or we need to change the medication. Now this passage, the passage of the healing of a blind man, is one that is unique for me. And especially so unique because Mark records it. Why specifically Mark? Several Sabbaths ago, so many of you were not present, but I considered in the book of Mark, and I took us through the book of Mark and the miracles that take place in the book of Mark. And one thing that we noticed, that Mark has a term that repeats itself each and every time. And in most of the healings that have been recorded by Mark, we discovered then that there is a phrase that is repeated, and that phrase is, and immediately. And so from Mark's point of view, Christ's ministry is one that has a sense of urgency. Things seem to work so quickly. Things seem to work so urgently. And you will see that from chapter 1 verses 10, Christ has just been baptized, and we are told that the Spirit comes down immediately. Christ is being driven into the wilderness for temptation. We are told it happens immediately. And Christ is calling his disciples in verses 20. Things are happening immediately. In verses 28, we are told that even his fame was increasing immediately. When you move to verses 31, you notice that even Peter's mother-in-law, the healing happens immediately. In verses 41, the leper is healed immediately. In chapter 2, the paralytic man is being healed immediately. And so as you look at the book of Mark, things seem to happen immediately. And so I ask myself, if Mark is recording things that are happening immediately, why is it that only Mark captures this miracle that happens in stages? Why is it that only Mark captures this miracle that happens in stages? Some people have said that Mark is the fastest book of the Bible because Christ seems to be moving up and down. A lot of things are happening. The master is always on the move, doing things left, right, and center. But as you come to the book of Mark chapter 8 and verses 22 all the way to 25, you notice that there is a laxity that is coming in. It's as though Christ is unable to do things immediately. The power that has been speaking things out, the one who has been saying, your faith has made you well, and they happen immediately, the one with whose touch things have been happening immediately, seems to be overwhelmed with what is taking place here. And so he has to take some time. May I submit to us as we begin verses 22, that the narrative begins and says, then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him. Oh, that I would have friends who brings me to Jesus Christ. Oh, that we would have friends who are spiritually having their sight, and the best they would do is to bring us to Jesus Christ. When you have friends who are blind, where do you take them? You are spiritually blind family members, where do you take them? These gentlemen, they know that the blind are in their midst, they take him to Christ. Where do we take the blind in our midst? Yes, you are better than us spiritually. Yes, you have your sight. Yes, you know what the Sabbath is. Yet you know what the Adventist church stands for. Where do you take the rest of us who are blind? Do you find time to take us to Jesus? My Bible says they brought a blind man to him. If only I had friends who would bring me to Jesus, that whenever I fall, they will uplift me to Christ himself. That instead of forwarding my audios, they would uplift me to him who is higher than I. That when things break loose for me, instead of taking me to WhatsApp groups, they would take me to Jesus Christ. If only I had friends like these friends who would bring me to Christ. If only you had friends like these friends who would take you to Christ, that when things happen, they would take you to the Master who is able to restore you. The scripture says they came to Bethsaida and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. We live in an era where we take people to TikTok, we take people to Facebook. Most importantly, we take them to WhatsApp groups, or that we would take them to Christ. Verses 23. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Children of God, this evening, this is the same Christ who has been doing things immediately. This is the same Christ who has been doing things instantly. This is the same Christ who has